I think the other big part of it in the endurance world, again, regardless of your medium, is that at some point you're going to run into some proper discomfort. And that's going to happen, again, regardless of what sport you're pursuing. And so being able to be prepared for that moment, to be aware of what happens specifically for you in that moment of discomfort or mounting fatigue, and then being skillful to be able to manage that is ultimately going to be the deciding factor in an endurance sport, whether or not you continue or whether or not you decide to slow down or stop.
Welcome to the Low Tide Boys, a Swimrun podcast. I'm Chip.
And I'm Chris, and this is episode 193 of the show. We've got a great one for everyone this week. Joining us in Studio G is Dr. Justin Ross. He's a sports psychologist out of Colorado and someone who we've been talking a lot about on the show since we learned about him on the Morning Shakeout podcast back in January, February timeframe. We had this conversation right before leaving for Sweden, and it seems fitting to share this upon our return because I think there were some lessons from that conversation that turned out to be very helpful on the day.
It was a useful piece for us.
Just got to apply it right away. But yeah, Dr. Ross is great. I've been a big fan of his work since discovered him, and yeah, can't wait to share it with all of you.
It's amazing. But first, training update. So it's really nice to say there's no longer a 70-kilometer ÖTILLÖ-sized elephant in the room. And we can get back to a more realistic training volume. Soul-filling rather than soul-crushing. No rest for the worry, though. Chris is he's headed to Massachusetts for the inaugural Swimrun Cape Cod.
Yeah.
So this must, I'm sure folks are waiting with bated breath. How is the hip, the leg?
Yeah, the quad is doing better. It's doing better. It's a lovely multicolor psychedelic bruising right now. Everything from yellows and greens and purples. It's lovely. But yeah, feeling better. I'm going to try running shortly, see how that goes.
Test it out.
But yeah, and true to form, I don't know what's been going on this year. Maybe we just have like bad weather juju, but there could be like a hurricane.
I saw
hitting the
coming in, so
or at least like a really strong storm. So we'll see what happens. But
might be a wet one.
Yeah, windy and rainy at the very least.
But it's excited. I'm in the Facebook group for the Swimrun Cape Cod, and people are really stoked out there. I saw someone, not the Dirksen, saying, I'm going to do a swim run at Walden Pond, and he want to join. And I'm like, oh, I know some people who you'll see there.
Nice.
But now on to this week's shout out.
Yeah, we're giving a blanket shout out this week to everyone that reached out to us to either wish us well in Sweden and or checked in on us afterwards. I mean, we mention it often that it's always super humbling to see all the support that we receive from everyone. And we appreciate it way more than we can adequately express. But yeah, it's just always just so amazing how many people were, especially once like the word of my injury, people hitting me up, giving me unsolicited medical advice, treatment protocols,
were they
all
writing
kinds
prescriptions
of stuff
for you?
No, I should have asked.
You should have kind of got some prescriptions, yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, it was. It's just always amazing. The people even care. Basically, it's much appreciated.
Yeah, it was awesome and so cool to see a lot of people that we've either had on as guests, have chatted to on Instagram or wherever we've chatted with you, to see you out there racing, cheering, volunteering, media, whatever. Yeah, it's just it's such a cool experience for us. And it's like, I wish we could do this, more than just once a year kind of thing. Yeah, really awesome to see folks. Now to this week's Feats of Endurance. So we're going to roll this theme right on going, and we're giving a blanket award to everyone that raced and volunteered at ÖTILLÖ last weekend. We've said it before, but it obviously is worth repeating that everybody lines up at the start of this race, gets all of our respect, regardless of outcome on the day. Even finish, just to have the stones to be out there in the start line is good enough.
Lining up, respect. Just to put in the work to show up. Things can happen on race day, slips, falls, all kinds of stuff. But yeah, just to show up. Respect.
Absolutely. So we were doling out kudos. We certainly were receiving lots of kudos on the Low Tide Boys Strava Club. So head on over to Strava, search Low Tide Boys, and join in the fun over there. Now, for This Week in Swimrun.
All right, now for the news. We're keeping it in America this time.
Oh.
And it doesn't happen often. Probably shouldn't happen too often, but it definitely doesn't happen often enough that there's 2 swim runs taking place in the United States this weekend. Can you imagine that? Over in Washington, Odyssey Swim Run Orcas Island is taking place on Sunday, September 17th. We love this race. Can't recommend it enough. If you're waiting for the last minute to sign up, now's your time to shine. Go for it. Figure it out. Make it out there. You won't regret it. We guarantee it. Now, over in Massachusetts, we mentioned it earlier, New England Endurance Events is hosting its inaugural Swimrun Cape Cod. This race takes place in the town of Wellfleet and has been sold out for a couple of months, which is super cool. So make sure you check out the podcast next week for our race report on this new race. Over in the UK, Swimrun Oxford is taking place on Sunday, September 17th. Thank you, Mike Phillips, for putting this race on our radar. It looks like a fun one, so head over there if you're able to support this local event. Blanket statement, public service announcement from the Low Tide Boys. Support your local swim runs. We need as many of these as possible. We're really going to grow this thing. So if you're in the UK, if you're around Oxford, if you're studying at Oxford, no excuse. Yeah, congratulations, nerd. That's it for this week. Reach out to us if there's anything you'd like for us to mention on the show.
Yes, now for a little bit of show business. So, if you haven't already, please consider leaving us a rating and a review for the show on either Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or whatever platform you listen on. Also, we have a YouTube channel, and we've been trying to do some more video stuff for you. All of our podcasts are on YouTube, so you can just listen if you listen on YouTube. But we've been filming our race reports, specifically the Casco Bay one and then the one at ÖTILLÖ. They seem to get more views than our regular stuff, so we assume that that means people like it, but we have YouTube over there. But leave us a review, Apple Podcast, find our podcast, go in there, review, whatever stars, leave a thing, and that really helps us get the word out about it, and whatever boost that does to the algorithms, we will take it. But thank you kindly.
Yeah.
So it just helps the word get around for folks.
It does. It does. So if you're listening to this right now, just pause it. Give us a 5-star.
You can go in there.
Review.
You don't have to pause. You can still listen.
Oh, okay.
And you could probably
even
still
better.
do it. Yeah.
Even better.
Line it up. Like here. There's the boys are so funny. And they're just so great. I love Swimrun. 5 stars. There you go. Now on to our conversation with Dr. Justin Ross.
Yeah, it was really great to chat with Dr. Ross. I've been, if you've heard this show at all this year, I've been totally fangirling on him. As we mentioned at the outset, we discovered Justin at the start of the year and began incorporating his methodology in our build-up to ÖTILLÖ. In this conversation, we chatted about his background and approach, the importance of self-awareness, and what it means to be, quote-unquote, in it, which we were definitely in it and experiencing what that's like last week, and so much more. You'll really want to get your notepads out for this one because this is chock full of just, this is the next frontier in training, which is just training your physical system, training your mental system, along with nutrition and strength and all that stuff. So, yeah, this was... I really enjoyed this one, Chipper.
I did too, and I think when we wrapped on this one, it was literally like we were leaving the next day for Sweden or something, and we just were like, oh, that was so great, and it felt like a nice little bow onto us leaving to Sweden and the conversation that we have, and like Chris mentioned earlier in the show, literally during ÖTILLÖ, we're in it, and I'm like, oh, we're in it now, and once you listen to the interview, you'll understand what that means, but. Really helpful and super applicable stuff that I really found to be very helpful from Dr. Justin Ross. And I know you have been singing his praises, Chris, and you did his program earlier this year, and it seems to have worked well. So I'm going to be looking into that as well. But without further ado, let's kick it over to our conversation with Dr. Justin Ross. He's also quite the endurance athlete himself.
He's got chops.
Yeah. He didn't, not too much humble bragging going on, but I know Leadville 100 mountain bike race, like he does some serious endurance stuff. So good on you, JR. Over and out.
All right. Very excited excited for this conversation with the one and only Dr. Justin Ross. He's a performance psychologist, works with athletes of all walks and stripes, and I first learned about him in April from the Morning Shakeout podcast from our mutual friend Mario Frioli, and promptly signed up for his performance psychology course on Final Surge, and just found so much value in it. It really set up my entire year. I've been talking about it on the show all year since I discovered you, so long way of saying welcome to the show. Super stoked to have you on.
Oh man, it's a great pleasure to be here, and I can't wait to dive in.
Yeah, so let's dive in at the beginning. I mean, when you were on the Morning Shakeout podcast, you really kind of opened my eyes into, there's this whole area of training that the way you describe it was really interesting, because there's obviously you got to train your physical system, but there's this whole school of thought on how to train your mental system, which I'd love for you to just get into that, and just let's start from the top.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think, regardless of sport, I think sport traditionally is focused so much on training the specifics of whatever it is that you're working on, whether that's a run program or a swim program or a bike program.
Or both in our...
or both in your case, yeah. But like what the evolution has been sort of sport-specific discipline, and then strength training got a lot of attention, and we started understanding the importance of strength training, not only for strength purposes, but for longevity purposes and for injury reduction purposes. Then nutrition sort of came along and said, we need to be thinking about how this can optimize performance and recovery. And I've always thought about sort of the mental side as like the fourth wave of training, if you will. It's sort of like I don't know if it's the last frontier, but it's the final frontier that we have right now. There might be another one later on. And so I think what we talk a lot about it, we hear so much about it, but nobody has really come forward and said, well, this is probably the way that we should think about training that system. And so that's been a bit of my mission over the past few years, is to think about what are, based on science and based on anecdotes from athletes, what are the things that athletes should be doing in their training to just improve not only their connection to sport, but to get the most out of it, knowing that the mind is often the thing that wants to quit before the body does. And the mind can talk us out of doing all kinds of things when really we probably have more to give physiologically. So that's kind of where this all started from my perspective.
I know they're definitely, I mean, people, when you talk to lay people about, oh, you're doing XYZ race and, oh, it's so long. And you'll always hear endurance athletes kind of throw around, I mean, it's easy to do it. It's just more of a mental thing. It's usually like the response there. And are you kind of, and the antidotes that you're getting from your athletes, is that kind of what, are you seeing that they're able to maybe unlock is not the best term to use, but are they able to sort of access more of their physical abilities by having their mind right, so to speak?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely part of it. I think the other big part of it in the endurance world, again, regardless of your medium, is that at some point you're going to run into some proper discomfort. And your mind, so if you think about evolutionarily, our mind has probably been evolved to talk us out of doing dumb things, right? Like, hey, this hurts. You should maybe think about just sitting down for a while, right? Or this is getting uncomfortable. So are you sure you really want to continue? And that's going to happen, again, regardless of what sport you're pursuing. And so being able to be prepared for that moment, to be aware of what happened specifically for you in that moment of discomfort or mounting fatigue, and then being skillful to be able to manage that, is ultimately going to be the deciding factor in an endurance sport, whether or not you continue or whether or not you decide to slow down or stop. And for a lot of people, that makes or breaks your performance.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that leads right into sort of our next question for you, which is, well, if this is true, which it is, how can you train your mind to accurately reflect whether it's your expectations, what you're trying to achieve, and I mean, it seems to me, like, as you mentioned, that's sort of the last frontier, and that's what I've been doing all year, is really trying to tap into, okay, I'm going to be running for 2 hours anyway. How do we not just turn this into working out the physical system, but also, hey, here's a great opportunity to think about something specific and work on something specific mentally?
Yeah, I love that approach. I'm a big believer that, your mind is coming with you no matter where you go in your life. And from that perspective, then every moment gives you an opportunity to either be sort of tapped into that, tuned into that, aware of that, and then disciplined to work on that. So my starting point is always awareness, right? I have this tagline: you can't change what you're not aware of. And so any type of performance psychology platform starts by being aware of what happens for you. And that's going to differ a little bit individually for each and every one of us. But the starting point is, the next time you're out on that 2-hour run, can you take some time to be just very deeply aware of where your thoughts go, of where your mind drifts, of what you're paying attention to, of the voices that pop up, the narrative you have, the story you have. And importantly, can you bring awareness to be able to distinguish what really starts to happen when it gets uncomfortable or you start fatiguing? What are the messages in the narrative that starts to creep up in those moments? Because ultimately, again, those are the moments that are going to be most critical to executing in your ideal fashion.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it also helps in terms of, this is something that I've heard you talk about before, the idea of it's an opportunity to set what you term your performance standards for training. How are you going to approach the training? How are you going to approach the workout, and so to speak? I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about what performance standards are and how we can use them to essentially set our intention. And then follow-up question to that is having you talk about the difference between outcome and process goals as it relates to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think almost every athlete that I know, especially in the endurance space, has an outcome goal that they're chasing. And they're important, right? They really anchor a lot of our plans and our training structure and our goals for the year. Outcome goals are very specific things, whether that's a time, I'm trying to pursue this time in this event, or, for chasing a top spot, a podium spot, like that's a very specific outcome goal. And you either hit it or you don't, right? I either hit that time goal, I hit that podium spot, or I didn't, right? There's really no gray area there. And it's a beautiful thing to have outcome goals, but it can also get us in trouble, because when we latch all of our identity onto that outcome goal, we're putting all our eggs in one basket. And when it goes well, it's amazing and it's celebrated and we hit a home run. It feels amazing. But when it doesn't go well, and sometimes it doesn't go well not because of our fault, but because the weather was tough, or because competition just showed up that day and knocked us off the podium, we could be really crushed. And so we need to have a bit of a buffer. So the buffer is what we term performance standards. Performance standards are individually set ways of being that are distinct from outcome goals, but yet they really guide your attention, your attitude, your effort. And when you latch onto performance standards, it gives you the best chance to ultimately reach your outcome goals. So the two that I see work the best, these are the two that I hold, at least right now, these are the ones that work really well for me, are rise above, which is sort of a mantra, but rise above for me is sort of a cue to, when you get uncomfortable, when it gets hard, or when I'm on the bike a lot these days and I'm riding with people who are, they're more talented than me. They've been riding longer than I have. When I think rise above, it's because I'm doubting, like, I shouldn't be up here. I shouldn't be with these guys. These guys are going to kick my ass. They're way better than I am, but rise above that thought and keep going. And the other is honor the spirit of the workout, or honor the spirit of the event, meaning every workout or every event has some type of energy behind it, right? So the classic example I always reference is if you're run training and you've got like 10 by 800 on the track, like, what that's supposed to feel like. It's going to be hard, and the last couple are going to be really challenging. And maybe by the time I get to 6, I'm already off my pace, right? I'm just not hitting my paces. Well, you have a choice. Can you honor the spirit of that workout to continue and to persevere and to give it the right effort level, even though you may be off a little bit on your pace? And if you do those two things repeatedly, it gives you the best chance for success. Same thing in a racing environment, right? Can you honor the spirit of what it takes in that moment to continue, even if you're off your race goals, or, you see first place just slightly pulling away? Can you stay with the right effort? I think that's really, really important. And then underneath that is what we term process goals. So process goals are the day in, day out, 100% controllable elements to your training, right? Are you, if a workout is written for 1 hour, are you doing that 1 hour? Or are you cutting it short at 45 minutes? Are you honoring all the elements of your life as an athlete that are crucial to success? Things like honoring rest and recovery and stretching and mobility work and strength training and making sure that you're sleeping appropriately and making sure that you're working on the mental game. You can answer yes or no to those every single day. But when you tier them up, process goals on a daily basis, very individually, personally relevant performance standards, meaningful outcome goals, it all gives you the best likelihood of being successful.
Yeah, and then you start sort of stacking both of those things and stacking those wins over and over and over, you're gonna see improvements on all fronts. And I think that's something that Chris and I, we've been sort of on a bit of a training journey over the last I don't know how long has it been, 3 years now, since 2020, yeah. 3.5 years. And I think that is a shift about, I love how you spoke to kind of honoring the spirit of the workout. Is some days you just don't have the gas for the 10 by 800 and you're not going to nail your split, but can you give it the 90% or the 95% effort of what you have left to execute on that workout? And I have felt when we've been able to do that, we're leaving the workout in a more positive outcome of like, hey, that was a great workout. Yeah, we didn't necessarily get it. Like if you look at the Garmin, it didn't hit it exactly, but we feel really good about the effort that we put down, and sort of that shift in mindset has really, I feel it's really put a lot of wind in our sails in terms of our training that we've experienced over the last several years.
Absolutely. I mean, it sounds like what that does is that it builds an authentic layer of trust, right? That you can look back upon and say, gosh, I remember a lot of these moments, and these moments where, okay, we were off where we wanted to be numbers wise, but we still put in the effort and we still put in the energy. And, we call all of that self-efficacy, which is just fancy language for it's our underlying belief system and what we think is possible or what we think our limits are. And the greatest builder of self-efficacy is our own personal history. When we can look back over time and say, gosh, I remember I got this light bulb moment 2.5 years ago where it sucked. It was raining, it was cold, and we were off our paces, but by golly, we did it anyway. We stuck with that effort level. And when you get time to really have to lay it down because there's a race on the line or an event on the line or a goal you're chasing, it's really important to be able to look back over your training log and not just look at the fancy numbers and the Garmin data that says like, yeah, you deserve to be here, but really all those performance standards that you executed, right? That prove to you that you are strong and capable and can persevere even when it doesn't seem likely.
Yeah.
So true. So true. Yeah. I mean, I even think like once you've developed that self-efficacy, one thing that I've seen, so we're at time of recording, we're literally about to leave to go to Sweden to do the Swimrun World Championship, which is one of the hardest single-day endurance events in the world. Also one of the coolest. That's an editorial comment, but I honestly believe that. And, it's been a lot of training, super long days. Our last block was crazy. The last training block was crazy, but there were some workouts where I was like, you know what? I'm super tired. I need to protect my body. And honestly, having done all this work all this year gave me sort of the license to be like, you know what? You know how I'm honoring this workout? By either not doing it or dialing it back to make sure that I'm taking care of everything else that's going on so I can, So I thought that was interesting that it almost like the inverse was also true.
Yeah, because underneath all of that was a deep layer of trust, right? Trust in being able to listen to your body and listen to the required responsiveness of the day and to look back and really believe like, no, we're adequately prepared.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like a confidence thing too, that I guess trust and confidence kind of definitely go hand in hand there. But like, hey, that with a training plan, nailing one workout is not going to make or break your race, just the same as not executing on one workout will as well. But I love your comment around your rise above mantra that you have. And whenever I hear mantras, I'm like, oh, that's so great. I wish I could think of something so like cool to like just like spout off like whenever. How do you kind of think about that? And, I think maybe the most famous one is shut up legs.
Oh, right.
Yeah, it's a pretty good one.
Yeah, it's a pretty good one.
Pretty good one. Yeah.
So, and sometimes, I personally, I do kind of find myself kind of diving into some of that negative self-talk about, oh man, you like cussing out myself or like really belittling myself mentally when I'm not able, when I see Chris pulling away on the trail and I'm like, oh man, you got to be keeping up with him kind of thing. How do you, which is, I'd have to imagine someone in your profession would advise against that sort of thing on a regular basis. But how do you deal with that kind of stuff, and how can not just me, but how can others that have sort of more negative self-talk, how can you kind of help correct some of that and not have that be your only sort of mantra, essentially?
Yeah, well, I always sort of, may sound weird, but like congratulate yourself for having negative self-talk, because in a lot of ways it shows two things. One, turns out you're a human and that's how our minds operate. And two, I usually reframe it as some version of like, congratulations, you've now arrived, right? Because now you're in it, right? Yeah. You've made it to this point now based on time or based on effort or based on being surrounded by competition, that you have some decisions to make. So congratulate yourself for being in this environment and celebrate it, because there aren't many environments like this that we get to really play and explore. So it's a really cool thing. And if you can do that, if you can level set it by some sort of statement of congratulations, I've arrived, it then gives you this opportunity, right? It's not a negative thing. It's not a fear-based thing. It's a celebration that your mind is operating in a very normal way in that moment. Now, the second part of that is then you probably want to evaluate, negativity is usually coming from some place of threat, right? Okay, something about this moment feels threatening. And maybe it's, okay, Chris is pulling away, and so I feel like, gosh, I'm a threat to being able to be successful in this workout or to being successful in the race, or my outcome goals are starting to feel as though I'm not going to hit them. So the second step is to evaluate what threat may be happening in that moment for you. And then the third is to go back to really being able to identify what's in your control in this moment? Like, can you still control your effort? Can you maintain the effort you're on? Can you speed up? Because you can't control him up ahead on the trail, but you can control your decision-making in that moment. Mm-hmm. And so some version of finding what that really looks like in a meaningful way to you is ultimately what this is about.
I mean, so that exact example, if you flip it, so I took about 114 days off of swimming, which was a real dumb idea to do when you're training for this thing. Chipper had been swimming the entire time. And I remember my first swim back, Chipper's in the lane next to me, and he's just running circles, swimming circles around me. And I'm like, man, I have a long way to go. And I was kind of down on myself. At that point, I already started listening to the class, and I was like, you know what? This cannot stand, because this isn't productive for anybody. So literally the next time when I went to swim, I essentially got into a mental space where I was like, I'm really proud of Chipper, because he's been putting a lot of work, and it shows, and that's great for our team. And I know that I know I have work to do, right? So like, I know that I need to put in the work, and I've got to put my head down. Oh, and by the way, I love swimming. And by the way, it's such a blessing to get to swim in this awesome pool that we swim at now with like redwood trees, and it's outdoor. It's great. Everything about it is great. The only thing that was negative was my approach to it. And literally from that first, this might be a couple of reasons for this, but from that first swim to that second swim, I think I shaved off like 15 seconds per 100 just from one swim or another. And again, that might have just been, that was going to happen anyway, but
you had fins on too.
Yeah, paddles and fins the whole time. But
snorkel,
don't worry about that part. But yeah, like the idea that like I set my intention before that swim, and I was able to just the negative talk just completely went away, because it was like I was happy for Chipper. That's good for me too, because he can pull me in the water. But it was also like, I can't control anything that he's doing. He was able to swim for a long time where I wasn't able to swim. So I mean, it just works. It was so helpful that I think like after that happened, I think that might have been the first time we talked about it on the show at length, because it was really just like expanding in terms of what I thought was possible within myself. And the pool, as you know, because you've done triathlon, I mean, it's black line therapy the whole time. You can really get in your head for 45 minutes to an hour and a half, however long your swim is, right?
Yep.
So I just wanted to give that actual example of everything that you're saying and how it 100% worked.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of wisdom in that, in terms of, one, being aware of your thoughts, right? Again, none of this can happen if you're not aware of what's occurring in your mind. Two, thinking about negativity is restrictive in our lives, and it's going to narrow our focus, and it's a bit of an anchor. Last thing you want when you're in the water is an anchor around your ankles, right?
Amen.
Bad news bears, right? So if you think about, okay, I'm aware negativity is restrictive and this is an anchor, right? Positivity is expansive in the sense that it opens opportunity. And from positivity, you can focus on gratitude. You can focus on opportunity that this event or this training is giving you. You can focus on joy. You can focus on all kinds of things. And you can think about it, it's sort of like a balloon, or it's maybe a little bit like a tugboat, right? It's not a speedboat, but it's going to help pull you forward. And again, we all have a duty to bring awareness to our thoughts, and then to pay attention to, okay, this is negativity. It's anchoring me down. How do I get to positivity in some way? Now, the trick is we can't make this up. It has to be genuine for you. You can't just pretend like everything is unicorns and rainbows and then expect great things to happen. It has to be personally relevant for you in that moment in order for it to work.
Yeah, love that. Love that. Now, let me ask you, Chipper and I, we're teammates. We've been teammates in Swimrun since 2018, and training buddies in life for almost over a decade at this point. How does your advice change, or does it change when you're dealing, we have a shared outcome goal. We have this, again, a time of recording a week from today, we'll be done with the World Championship. We have a lofty outcome goal to do this really hard event. Does your advice change when it's like, hey, I got to take care of him. We have to make sure that we're taking care of each other. And, my pace is going to be limited by him. His pace is going to be limited by me. And we have to, essentially try to lift each other up to get through this thing.
Yeah. So, obviously communication is a huge added element to sort of a team event like this. Mm-hmm. And so making sure that you've been working on that is really, really vital. And then making sure that you are fully aware, and even before the event has started, you have a bit of a playbook so you know what the other person needs in terms of encouragement, and you're aware of what types of statements or attitudes are going to anchor the other person down. And so it's really important that you go into that. You can do all the physical training in the world. You could have everything dialed in. But if you don't have that communication dialed in and that rapport to be able to handle it together, that could certainly be something that kind of blows up your day.
Yeah, obviously Chris and I are, psychic tethers all the time. I was going to ask the same partner communication question, line of questioning as well. But yeah, and I think when we get a lot of new people to the sport, there's a lot of unknowns there, and they're like, oh well, the person that's my partner runs an 8-minute mile and I run a 7-minute mile, and I swim slower, and it's like, that's less of the problem. The problem is what we've seen in our experience is really just getting your goals on the same page, so that way there's not a mismatch of like, hey, partner A is like trying to win the thing, and partner B is trying to like make a GoPro video and take cool pictures and just look at all the fish in the water all the time, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So that's like getting on the same page there. And I think your points are really well taken around communication and really understanding. Obviously, the more time you can have with your partner, the more opportunities there are for these sort of conversations. If we've been, training together on endurance training for a decade, I think we have some good stuff. We have a good,
right.
Good Rolodex.
Got a deep base
to go off of. Yeah. But I love how you highlighted those things. So like really understanding, and I guess it makes the most sense to just be really explicit about, hey, if I am dragging behind or I'm in a bad way, don't give me the like tough love coach, like, oh, suck it up, let's go kind of thing. Is that how you would sort of approach those things, is really just kind of lay it out on the table, like these things do well for me and these things I do not do well with?
Absolutely. I think that's exactly right. And I think you're right. Going back to goals up front is really important to make sure that you're on the same page. Any big discrepancies that you have about what you're pursuing are going to be irritation points. And irritation points are not what you want in any endurance event, because that one little pebble in your shoe becomes a pretty big problem, later in the race.
Yeah.
So making sure that you're on the same page, and then, having this really honest conversation as you go into it. Here's what I need from you. And actually, here's what I don't need from you. I need you to not say these things, right? Yeah. These are things that are going to trigger me because they're going to fuel negativity or they're going to fuel judgment. And so I really need this type of approach from you.
Nice.
Yeah. I mean, I think that advice is always really well taken. And I think, our swim run relationship, and we've mentioned this on the show a bunch of times, it starts from a place of love and friendship. And that's what the most important thing throughout all this stuff. So, that's the thing that's never jeopardized, no matter what we're doing. But when you get into, okay, we're clearly in outcome goal territory.
Yep.
How, what advice do you have when you are chasing your goal, whatever that might be, and things start going sideways? How do you, again, besides like doing the work and training, but let's assume some people are coming to this fresh and it's like, okay, race is happening. What advice do you have for folks on how they can still enjoy the experience and not even be conscious of what's going on because they're so upset with their performance?
Yeah, I think so. Maybe part of it is, I'll sometimes ask people this question as they get ready for a really big event. What are you willing to risk? And for a partner event like this, this may be a conversation for you fellas to have. Like, what are you willing to risk? Are you willing to risk your friendship and your love for one another that you've had for a decade? Are you willing to risk somebody being really uncomfortable because, you're the weaker link in one leg and you really need to lay it down in order to catch up? Yeah. So coming to terms with that clearly is really important. And for anybody who's running a solo event, it's the same thing, So I think about this a lot, like in the marathon community. What are you willing to risk? Because at mile 20, it's going to get hard. It's going to be uncomfortable. And you could take the deal, and the deal is, oh, it's uncomfortable, I'm going to slow down. Well, what you're risking is then you're going to have psychological regret later in exchange for physical safety or reduced discomfort now. Or you flip that and you're like, no, I'm going to go for it. Okay. Then what you're risking is the potential to blow up because you're really on the red line in exchange for maybe some really deep satisfaction in playing with that moment. And so at events like this, I think that's the question. Are you willing to risk, the podium spot, right? Being top of the box in a world championship event? Are you willing to risk your friendship? Are you willing to risk certain layers of discomfort? You both have to be clear about that going in, because it may be called into task at some point during the event.
Yeah, I mean, that's
like that. Yeah.
It's an interesting way of thinking about it. I mean, I feel like, I guess I hadn't thought about it that way. I always thought about it more in terms of like, and maybe we're saying the same thing, in terms of an opportunity for bravery or for courage. Mm-hmm. Like when you hit mile 20, it's like, all right, are you going to be courageous and ride that line where you could totally blow up, or you could do the thing, or are you going to, sort of dial it back? But yeah, I think that the way you described it is kind of takes off sort of like that. I feel like this is so loaded to say, oh, be brave, be courageous, because, this isn't.
Yeah, there's
no
also
one's making you do this.
Yeah, a negative piece of like, oh, are we going to go for it? Are we going to be brave or be courageous? And it's like, oh, well, I don't feel like I have it. Then it's like, oh, then there's a negative piece
the inverse,
about like,
the inverse is just cowardice, right?
Yeah.
So yeah,
right. This is where performance standards can really be helpful, because in that moment, it's like saying, okay, well, going for it could mean, if you run like 8-minute pace or 7-minute pace, or whatever that is for you, but staying on that threshold level, right? Or it could be saying like, oh, I need to really rise above and push into that, knowing that there's a chance that could completely blow up in my face, and I'm not going to be able to continue. I'm going to have to really dial it back. And for an event like this, that's a 2-person team, you each have to have that conversation about like, okay, what are you willing to risk in terms of pursuing that outcome goal or the potential for pursuing what may happen in your relationship? and being really clear about that before the gun goes off.
Yeah. And I think we have that sort of established, I guess, Chris and I, but we also have these sort of check-ins like during the race, or if we're able to be more racy about like, hey, he'll be like, or I'll say, hey, I can give more, or be just explicitly communicative during the race about like, it's a known between Chris and I, he can usually put more pace than what I'm able to give. So if I can sort of, let the reins go a little bit, say, hey, I got more to give if you want to go, sort of give him permission to do that, and sort of vice versa in different areas. That's how we sort of manage that during the race, because swimrun deals you a lot of curveballs during a race, and there has to be a lot of, you got to be able to move and be flexible as things come across. So like having a deep understanding of what you're willing to give is going to be important to help a more fluid experience, I guess, during the race.
Yeah, and having that check-in of being able to say, I can give more is really important, right? That can then set pace and tone, but having that communication dialed in early is critical.
Yeah. On the opposite side of that, I guess, how do you kind of advise? Because I know sometimes it is tough for a lot of people to ask for help. I'm putting myself in this camp, but let's say it's going too hot, or you're feeling like you're getting drug along, and you're taking on water. You don't want to be taken on. How do you sort of suggest like approaching that if it in that time when people have problems, I guess, asking for help and sort of speaking up about, hey, this is too much for me, or this is going into an area I don't want to go in.
Yeah.
How do you sort of advise that?
Yeah, I mean, I think usually the concern with that is usually that there's an associated weakness that somebody attaches to saying we need to slow down. And so, none of us like to feel sort of weak. And so if we have that tie, we're not likely to reach out for help or to ask for paces to slow down. So a lot of times the work up front is decoupling the need to slow down or the need to get support. We need to decouple the idea that is a sign of weakness, right? It's not. I mean, we all have physiological limits. And if you're, right there or exceeding them, or you're having an equipment issue or whatever it may be, to be able to say like, hey, hold up, we gotta dial it back a little bit. The only way we really have permission to do that is if we've done the internal work to decouple that as a sign of weakness. Now we could take that, we could use it as a launching pad and really have this bigger conversation around how that applies to mental health more generally speaking, but that's often a culprit that gets in the way of seeking help.
Yeah. I mean, because it's almost like if you can just turn it into something non-dual, like, yes, it can be both and. You could need help, but it's also doesn't mean that you're weak kind of thing. And just sort of understand that it's more of a journey, and, doing what's required is more important than however you might be feeling about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And we, there's all these examples of we get help in so many ways without it being a bother. Like I take my car in to get the oil changed, right? I don't consider that a sign of weakness. I like my car to run the way I like it to run. I like to a mechanic, to get them tuned up because I like that. And if I break my arm, I'm going to go get an x-ray and then a cast, and I go to the dent, like all these, there's hundreds of them that we all do. And yet when it comes to like in the endurance world, like, hey guys, I need to slow down. Like, oh, we're so afraid of saying that. Or like, hey, I really could use some help with this thing I'm struggling with. Like, oh, we're so afraid to say that. So I think it's, again, that internal work, that internal awareness around decoupling whatever kind of label we slap on it. And if we can do that, then it's not as painful to get the support we need.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah. This is going to sound like a random question, but you do individual coaching, you work with patients, you work with groups, you do speaking, you do all this stuff. I'm curious, kind of what's the most common, I guess,
process?
Yeah, or like, I'm trying to not make it sound like super clinical, but when people come to you for help, like what's the most common symptoms or what are they usually looking for your help for?
Yeah, It really depends on the context. So right now, as we sit here, I'm doing a lot of work with teams throughout the country, sort of like amateur running teams, getting ready for fall events, primarily half marathon and marathon. And before every session, especially before the first one, I send out a polling question, right? And it's a very open-ended question. What are you hoping to learn from taking this series? And then I put it up on the screen for the team to see. And 90% of the responses all funnel towards one of two things. One, some version of mental strength. I have this, I want to be mentally stronger. Yeah. And two, I want to know how to handle the situation of discomfort or fatigue better, right? Because at some point, like we've talked about, it gets uncomfortable, you start fatiguing, and the mind starts to want to talk you out of that. And so for endurance athletes, kind of proactively speaking, that's a huge avenue for things that I try to coach on individually in a team capacity. Often where I see individuals, when people are coming to me for just one-on-one, more confidential type of work, it's often related to coming back from an injury or an illness, and there's a lot of anxiety about returning back to sport for one reason or another. Or two, they're noticing that something about the way that they're approaching their sport mentally is interfering with their performance. They feel sort of that classic block. I'm not able to reach the potential that I feel like I have or I once did. Or a lot of times people come to me as, we're all human beings first, athletes second. There's comfort in knowing that, if I come to a professional who knows the sports side of things, we don't have to talk about the sports side of things, but I got this depression thing going on, or this anxiety, or this eating disorder, or this relationship, or this stress, or like, holy hell, my family is a disaster and I need some help, but I can also feel comfortable. I don't have to explain my sport to you. So I get a lot of that as well.
It's interesting.
It's really insightful.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's not surprising that that's the most common thing. People are trying to use this type of work to get some sort of performance advantage, right? Like to try to unlock something within themselves and, go dark when they need to go dark.
Right.
And so I guess the natural follow-up question to that is, well, what would you prescribe for someone who's like, sort of generally speaking, again, you don't need to give all the tools of the trade away, but what do you prescribe as you mentioned becoming more self-aware, getting good understanding what's going on, but sort of beyond that, what would be your sort of first couple things that you tell folks to try?
Yeah. So the first thing, just to expand on the awareness, that really is step one. And I'll often prescribe, if you will, prescribe in air quotes, taking this deep awareness with you in not only your whole life, but specifically in your life as an athlete. So as you're getting ready for your workout of the day, like, what are you noticing happening in your mind? As you're doing your workout, what are you noticing happening? As you put your workout away or you move on to the next part of your day, what's happening in your thoughts? And to track this stuff. Now, most of us are using some type of tracking platform, Final Surge or Training Peaks or Strava or Garmin Connect or whatever. There's areas now for you to be able to write notes. If you have a coach, you have this interaction through that platform that way. But write 3 or 4 sentences. Oh, here's what I noticed about my thoughts today. You know what? I got really dark when it got really hard and my mind wanted to quit, and here's what I did about it. Awareness is always the first step. Adjunctive to that, what can help people develop awareness is some type of mindfulness or meditation practice. And that's usually done outside the confines of their training or their practice. Simple 3 to 5 minutes a day to sort of just sit and pause, focus on your breathing, focus on awareness of what's happening around you in your environment, helps you train that awareness skill. That's really, really important. From there, it's then sort of getting a better understanding of what it is that we want to work on. And there's all kinds of ways we could think about how you talk to yourself, how you, appraise data in your body, how you change your attention, your focus, your concentration. And all of those things are going to have different impacts at different times. But a big part of it is helping people, bring awareness to, okay, where are the pain points? And then how do we help you develop skills around improving whatever that may be for you?
Yeah. And I've been working on some mindfulness. Shout out to the Peloton app. I don't know if you,
yes,
how you feel about that, but whatever.
I've got a Peloton
whatever.
in my basement. Yes, good things.
But one thing that I've really noticed about it, and I think this is sort of when I get those negative thoughts during a workout, it's like, how can I stifle this like really negative thing out? Like, I need this thought, I need to smash it and make it not happen, as opposed to what I've kind of been learning. And I'd like your take on this is like, hey, the thoughts are going to come and go all the time, and you can't really stop them. So being able to sort of recognize, hey, here is a thought, whether it's negative or whatever, sort of take it and just let it go and make space for the next one. Is that sort of how I guess going dark? And when I hear that, I think of like shutting off the brain sort of, and like not, just really focusing. But when those thoughts are coming in constantly, is that sort of how you recommend the approach be? I know this is a very tactical question.
No, that question makes
applicable to me.
sense. Yeah, no, I think this is humanity in general, because what I hear so often is people come in and we fall into this trap of like, it's like, oh, I know. Let me just not have these dark negative thoughts. If I could just get them to not show up, I'd be great. And so the analogy I use is it's about like how we think about learning language. So, this is a weird question. How did you learn how to speak English?
It just sort of happened, I guess. It's what I was taught, I suppose.
Right. It's a weird question, right? Let's just be honest. So it's a weird question, but that's the answer is, gosh, I don't know. I mean, my family of origin spoke it. It was spoken in my community. It was taught in school. So I guess I just learned English. So the follow-up question is then, how did you learn to speak to yourself in your mind the way that you do? And the answer is very much the same. Like, gosh, I don't know. It just kind of formulated over the course of my life, right? Based on the interactions I had, based on my community, based on opportunities I had. So the analogy is this. So I'm a monolingual speaker. I speak a little Spanish, but not a lot. If at my age I wanted to learn Spanish, I could, right? There's nothing getting in the way of me learning how to speak Spanish. The first thing I wouldn't try to do is I wouldn't try to unlearn English. And in fact, I can't. It's not possible. But, barring a traumatic brain injury or something, I cannot unlearn English. The problem that so many people fall into when they pursue psychological training is they come in and they're like, hey, I know. I'm going to unlearn English, right? I've been doing all this work to push it away, to unlearn it. And now I'm bothered that I can't unlearn English. So they have two problems, right? They can't unlearn English and they're pissed off that they can't unlearn English. You have to think about your mind just like you would think about learning a second language or a third language as an adult, right? It's, again, awareness, right? 1 + 1 is 2, but uno y uno es dos, right? And so in the moment, you can't get rid of 1 + 1. You just can't. But you can have the skills to be able to say, I'm noticing it. I also have this other way of talking to myself. I have this other way of appraising it. And it can also, it could be 2 and dos at the same time. And the more we can approach the mind from that perspective, the more expansive we have. Again, go back to mindfulness. The beauty of mindfulness is that it helps bring that awareness. So when we can do it when we're still and we're quiet, we enhance that skill to do it when it's busy and noisy and those voices are full of doubt or anxiety or judgmental.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing. And and I think to that, so as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, I took your performance psychology class on Final Surge, so found it super helpful. I've referred it to anyone who wants. I've been sending people that way.
Thank you.
I'm curious. I mean, it was such a good idea to kind of do something like that, where it's like, hey, just overlay this on your physical training. Here's a mental training you can do. It takes about 5 to 10 minutes a day, kind of thing. Mm-hmm. It's almost like reading like a daily devotional with a task at the end. Where did that idea come from? And I guess just a selfish question, has it been successful? Like, have people been signing up for that? Because it was just so great for me.
Yeah, it really started, I've been playing around with this idea for years around like, how do we actually give people the advice and the science and some daily practices for doing this work? Because, the fourth wave performance psychology has gotten a lot of attention in the past few years. people talk about mental toughness. They talk about this stuff, but they don't really help you understand how to apply it to your training. So, a friend of mine and an ultra endurance coach, Jason Coop, who's in the Springs, we've been talking for years, and he's like, man, you got to write a book. You got to write a book. You got to write a book. And I'm like, I don't think I want to write a book. I don't think that's the right platform for this. I think there's got to be another way. And then finally at the beginning of the year, I was just like, you know what, damn it. I'm just going to put it on. I'm going to start with Training Peaks. I'm going to put together some thoughts, and I'm going to see what happens. And so then I put it on Training Peaks and I put it on Final Surge. The tricky part about it is that it has to be broad enough to cover a wide variety of athlete type and endurance type and sport pursuit. And it's hard to be able to really pinpoint some of those workouts with the actuality of their training. Ideally what happens, my hope for athletes is that you take this 12-week class, you learn the foundations of how your mind is working, and then you have to do some sort of individual skill matching. Right. So like, okay, these are the days where I really need to focus on the skill of attentional control, or I need to really focus on my version of mental toughness and how I apply that. But that takes a little bit of nuance and individual approach to the process.
Yeah.
Nice.
And I would definitely, again, highly recommend those courses. I mean, again, it was such an eye opener. And I think Chipper was probably getting tired of me getting all soulful on him and stuff on our joint runs, but yeah,
too heady, Chris.
But
I
think if Chipper can, I don't know if you want to speak to this, but I've noticed a change in just my approach to training and honestly life in general through this work, and sort of my gratitude level's much higher. And, we have this huge race coming up, and I've been trying to kind of get into this headspace where, a couple years ago we did a race and I had an amazing race, and, trying to diagnose, okay, what was it about that experience that was so positive that I performed so well? And, it turns out, when I studied it on a run, it was like, oh, I was there with one of my best friends. Some of my other friends did swim run for the first time. We stayed in this awesome house. It was like, everything about it was just so much fun. That's what really unlocked that potential for me. But I wouldn't have been able to sort of even go back and kind of do a postmortem on that without kind of having done this work. So I think when you're saying like going through a course like this can be helpful, but then once you have it, you constantly have to keep applying it, because it isn't like, all right, now I know Spanish, I don't need to like practice with anyone because I know it, right?
Right. Yeah, it's like, right, it's like fitness, right? Like you don't go to the gym once and then walk out and be like, yeah, all right, fit, we're good, life goal achieved.
It dropped the 10 pounds I needed to lose.
Yeah, right.
One session. Yeah.
Totally. It's consistent. And I think that the beautiful thing that I've learned from so many endurance athletes is we have our personal reasons for pursuing this. Whatever discipline we're in, it usually provides a fair amount of meaning for us. And we have this sort of lifelong goal of being active human beings. And that may change, the medium may change, but as long as we're continuing to pursue sport, we're finding satisfaction, we're using it as a way of testing curiosity and our limits, there's always going to be an opportunity to have that awareness of what's happening psychologically and to use that to better understand yourself. And for me, I think the real, like really what I'm driving at here is hopefully helping people live better, more meaningful, more satisfied lives in general. Because if you could take that home, to your partner and your family and your community, the great saying, rising tide floats all boats. I mean, I think if we could do that for one another, like, man, maybe we could raise the level of things around here just a little bit, and everybody benefits from that.
I mean, I think we just have to.
Yeah, we got to end it there.
End it there.
No, there's no topping that.
Like,
the tide is high.
Ladies and gentlemen, his name is Dr. Justin Ross.
When you
his
quote
website
JFK at the end, it's like,
it's okay. www.drjustinross.com. Performance psychologist. Highly recommend his performance psychology course. He also has a guided meditation, race day guided meditation practice. We'll put the link in the show notes. I love that. I just found it a few weeks ago.
Download that
and listened to it a couple times, and it's fantastic. So, Justin, thank you so much for taking the time. This was awesome. Really appreciate you.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me on. And man, I wish you guys just the best time and best of luck. And I hope opportunity window comes together and it all just is a beautiful day for you guys. So good luck.
Thank you so much. And thank you for your time.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Cheers. That's it for this week's episode. Thanks so much for listening to the show. Make sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and leave a rating or review, since that's the best way to help other people discover the show and the sport of swim run.
Check out our website, lowtideboys.com. That's boys with a Z, for swimrun resources, including gear guides, tips, how-to videos, and so much more. Make sure to check out our meme page at The Low Tide Boys on Instagram. If you have any questions or suggestions for the show, send us a DM or email us at lowtideboys@gmail.com.
We'd like to thank Riding Easy Records for our show music, and of course our wives for their support and tolerance of our swim run and other activities.
Lots of activities.
Lots of activities.
Finally, you can support our efforts on Patreon. Until next time, get out there and go for a swim.
Then a run.
And then a swim.
Then another run.
Then another swim.
Then run some more.
Just keep going.
Let's go.
And then stop at some point because,
And fuel. Don't forget to fuel.
Gotta fuel
too. Of course, yes.